Well, it's the 23rd of October, and we are pleased to have Deacon Lee here. And we're going to get him to talk about being a deacon and his not simple path to become a deacon and what he can do with us here at Holy Cross.
Thank you, Jack. It's in thinking about coming here to Holy Cross, it's really been about a new experience amongst many experiences that I've had, from being a police officer to a social worker to being a bureaucrat in the Tennessee prison system, and it all goes back really to being a teaching parent with my wife in a group home working with young children with behavioral issues. And that's when I knew that I wanted to do something outside the box. I guess that's the best way to put it. Working with children, sometimes their parents, sometimes with folks that were on parole for some pretty heinous crimes, sometimes with probationers, but always with folks that were on the margins of society. And we always talk about re-entry when we're talking about parolees. They're re-entering society from prison. But more times than not, what we're really talking about is people who are entering society for the first time. If you go back and you look at their histories, they started off not doing well in school. Then they didn't do well in the community. They hadn't had jobs. They weren't able to work very often. And so they were always living on the margins. And then when they ended up in prison, they were further removed. And because they were removed, in many cases they were forgotten by everybody. Or, worse, labeled as somebody who was not redeemable, somebody that was not worth having. And many police officers I knew would say, lock them up and throw away the keys. But because I'm a Christian, and because I was a social worker, I felt compelled to believe in redemption and reconciliation and forgiveness. All of those things wrapped up. And somebody has to give them a chance from the very beginning to find those things. And when I was at my lowest, when I thought I could no longer be a deacon, when I couldn't do my other jobs because of some medical issues, I ended up here at Holy Cross. And I was here to be a parishioner. I wasn't here to be a deacon. I had retired from being a deacon. And then God stepped in once again, and through a doctor, I found medicine that's got me standing, got me walking and talking. Sometimes I can even walk and chew gum at the same time. But the bottom line is, here I was in a new community, already had found my worshiping center right here at Holy Cross Faith Memorial, and I was invited to resume my ministry as a deacon. And it doesn't take long to be on this campus to see what's going on. But more important to me is what can go on that's not being done quite yet. And how can I find those people that are on the margins again? And being a deacon is a great place to find them. They come here to ask for help. They're in my community. I live down in Georgetown. There is so much need and such a desire to reach out and help people that it seems like, I won't say a deacon's paradise, but it is a great place for a deacon to be that still wants to work. And I've got more ideas than I have plans.
Yes.
But but I am finding that people are inviting me in, and every time I learn something else about this church, it just strengthens what I already feel about the place. For example, the cemetery across the street, and the bones of the enslaved people that have been interred there. And this church took those forgotten people and gave them a place. But more importantly, they recognized their dignity as human beings. They were enslaved people, but they are also God's children. And that's what makes this place, I think, so special. It was not enough to just remove the bones from wherever they were found, whatever development they were found in, and put them aside. But this community took the time to do it right. And Holy Cross Faith Memorial was a leader in that effort to do it right. So that's what makes me, personally, how I got here and what makes me feel so glad to be here.
Of course, that particular, that's not finished.
No.
We can do more.
And I think, and it's obvious to me that we will do more. So I'm not the least bit, in fact, just hearing about the plans of the monument that will be put there, and of the interactive history lessons that will be provided to tell the story, the true story of those enslaved people, putting flesh on their bones in a sense, and reminding us that we all end up as bones, and but as long as people remember us, we're more than just bones. And hopefully we will be those people who remember them in a way that gives them honor and lets them know that they are not forgotten.
We have some assurance that we're baptized by Father Glennie, and are Christians just like us, baptized in the same, not that we're better than other sects, but we're in the same denomination. And so it's our job to get them properly reinterred and properly honored.
But it is a job that we could have sloughed off to somebody else, and we chose not to.
That's right. Well, you told me Father Will, so he's going to slough off. You told a great story about being a little acolyte. I'd like to hear that story again.
When I was about 12, I just joined the Episcopal Church. I had come from the Methodist Church and joined the Episcopal Church. I had asked in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I asked my mother, I said, can I become an Episcopalian? And she said, well, do you want to? And why? And I said, well, I like the church service better than the Methodist church service, and I like what they're trying to do, and I think that's where I want to go to church. And she said, okay. So after I got confirmed, I became an acolyte in the church. And I used to practice. I wanted to be the best acolyte ever. And I used to practice looking pious, serious, focused on God, however you want to describe it. So I'd get in front of the mirror and go, serious. And I practiced sitting stone cold still so that I would not be a distraction. But I hoped that folks would notice, look how still that acolyte is. Look how so deeply involved he is in the service. And usually I was worried about, do I hold the wine in my right hand and the water in my left, or whatever? So And when I look back on it now, I kind of chuckle, because I don't think anybody noticed. And I was there really for the wrong reasons. But the more I sat up there, and the more I listened, and the more I talked with the priests that were real mentors to me, the more I realized I just liked doing the job. I felt joy in being an acolyte, and I've stopped caring about what people thought about me as an acolyte. You know, when I came here, one of the things I was known for back in Tennessee, and I think I'm kind of known for it here, is my dismissal. And oftentimes you'll hear me do a 1-sentence or 2-sentence summary of the sermon. And I don't do that for me. I do that to hopefully inspire folks as they walk out the door to go and do or be just a little bit more Christian-like, Christ-like to the folks that they encounter, especially the hard folks, the people who are begging for money or are obviously drunk or addicted, those who are lonely, and those who are in deep, deep pain. And sometimes a simple word or two, just an acknowledgement of the pain, or an acknowledgement of their existence even. Because so often we put on the blinders so we won't see them. That's what this place does. We've taken off the blinders and we're out there looking to be Christ-like with other folks and recognize the Christ in them, which may be more important even.
What's the name of the priest in Knoxville?
Oh, well, there were 3 of them.
Okay, 3 names.
3 names.
Yeah.
I won't say they were the Holy Trinity, but there was Father Sanford Garner. He was the rector of the church, and he was the fatherly mentor to everybody, nice guy. Then there was the fiery, on the fringes type preacher, Raymond Lawrence, who was about as radical a preacher as you would ever find. Mm-hmm. And then there was the young deacon in training, getting ready to be ordained a priest, Jim Curtis. And so I got to experience all 3 of them, mm-hmm. often on Sunday mornings between services at the Howard Johnsons, where they would talk theology and I would interrupt and ask questions. And
what a marvelous opportunity to learn.
And one of them said that he thought I would be the youngest bishop in the history of the Episcopal Church. Uh-huh. That ship has long since sailed, uh-huh. and I am glad. I am not knitting my purples, uh-huh. as they say. That's when somebody's seeking to be a bishop, they say they're knitting their purples, uh-huh. getting their purple shirts ready to go.
That's marvelous imagery.
And I'm not one of those. I thought for a while I might want to be a priest, mm-hmm. but really, my calling has always to be the deacon, mm-hmm. And to be as good a one as I can be.
Now you had, anywhere, Ruby's building over there, you led us through an explanation of the history of the deacons.
Well, it was more of the Paulist fathers. But earlier I did talk about the deacons.
If you could give us some of that again, that was very helpful to me.
Well, deacons have long been on a roller coaster in the history of the church. Uh-huh. First of all, they were some of the earliest clergy in the church. And for a long time, they were far more popular and powerful than the presbyters or the priests in the church, mm-hmm. because they were the ones who took the sacraments and the resources from the church out to the poor, mm-hmm. the widows, the orphans, the incarcerated. So that's always where they've been. But, like many clerical orders, they got a little bit too big for their britches in about the 5th century.
Yes.
And so they were relegated to a lesser role in the church. And by the 20th century, deacons were pretty much fading out of favor and were not being ordained, other than being ordained as a transitional deacon to go to the priesthood.
A stepping stone.
A stepping stone to be a priest. And it wasn't, at least in the Episcopal Church, it wasn't until the 70s, basically, that they brought back the deacon that would be a deacon forever. They used several names. The first was non-stipendiary.
Yeah.
The second was perpetual deacon. And now they've come up with vocational deacons. I like the word vocational because it's what we do, it's who we are.
It's calling there.
That's the calling. That's the calling.
And the treasurer likes non-stipendiary.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
That's not so important to the rest
absolutely. And some churches have deacons, many do not. I think it's a clergy person that every church ought to have. And the unique thing about deacons is we are assigned to churches, but we're not a member of that church. We work specifically for the bishop of the diocese. Mm-hmm. And we're supposed to go out in the world, determine what the world's needs are, where the hurts are, where the brokenness is, mm-hmm. and then bring that back to the bishop and to the church in general and say, come on, let's rally around these things. Let's go out and solve some of these problems, or at least start the work on these problems. Mm-hmm. And it's always been about marginalized populations. And that term sounds a little bit clinical, and I'm not completely happy with it, but it's going out and working with the broken people in our communities, the people who are alone, hurting, and not finding joy in their life, and surely not believing that they are worthy of the love of God. And if that's the only thing I help them figure out, is that they are worthy of being loved by God, at least as worthy as any of the rest of us are, which is not worthy enough at all, but that it's there for them, and it's there for them to take that love, to live in it, to feel the joy of it, and feel the peace of it.
Where did this come from in you? This attraction to the marginalized, the outcast, the widow, the orphan. Did that come from your parents? Did it come from these three priests that you knew? Or?
A little bit of everything. A little bit of all. Yes, my parents first and foremost. Mm-hmm. My mother.
And what's her name?
Anne.
Anne with an E?
Yep.
Okay.
No, not an E. No E.
Okay. Okay, mother?
And my father, but my mother especially, she was, I won't say obsessed, mm-hmm. but she was committed to social justice and fairness.
And was that across racial lines even?
Across racial lines. She marched in civil rights marches in Knoxville. Mm-hmm. She even, her brother was a Knoxville police officer, and when he would see her coming, he'd just turn his head and shake it. Yeah. There's my sister out there. He supported her mm-hmm. doing that, but he was also afraid for her.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
My mother sent me to a Quaker summer camp in Frogmore, South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And our main goal was to go to Savannah and get folks to sign petitions against the war in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And we invited folks that were visiting the Tennessee Valley Authority to learn more about hydroelectric power. TVA wanted them to meet American families. Now that was probably propaganda that they wished to have spread, but my parents took it seriously, and so I met people from Africa, Asia, Europe, even some communist countries back in the day, in the 60s, and the late 50s and early 60s. So I was exposed to folks from all over the world very early. And so my mother is probably foremost. But my dad was right there with her.
And what's his name?
Lee.
Well, okay.
I'm Lee the Third, as a matter of fact. So I was exposed to folks, different people from different places. And what I learned early on is that we're all basically the same. And that was I don't know that it was a revelation, but it sure was a joy to see that. I always believed that everybody was created the same. And even with all our differences, the different foods, the different cultures, the different dances, the different histories, we're basically all the same. We're all children of God. And so I learned that really early on from my parents, supported by what I learned in church, and what I saw in my parents' actions. So all of those things combined, and so then I thought, well, when I got to college, I thought I'm going to join the Peace Corps, and I got to that point where I was ready to maybe decide to do that.
And this is University of Tennessee.
University of Tennessee at Knoxville, and about the time that I thought I might want to join the Peace Corps, the Peace Corps switched their primary focus to folks who had real hard skills, agriculture, agronomy, and all those kind of things, which I had no knowledge of at all. And so I thought, well, that's not for me. And so then I thought about the priesthood, and I looked at the University of the South, and I looked at Sewanee, and then I saw the price tag and decided, and the entrance requirements, and thought, well, that's not for me. I can't do that. So I went to the University of Tennessee, and I majored in political science. Again, with that social justice kind of niggling in my ear at all times. And eventually it led me to social work. And so I eventually got a master's degree in social work at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, as they always say. They don't just say the University of North Carolina. It's always the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
Some of us are old enough to remember when you didn't have to do that.
When you didn't have to do that.
It just was UNC.
Yeah. And in fact, all you had to say was Chapel Hill.
That's right, if you said Chapel Hill.
Chapel Hill, that folks...
Now, Chapel Hill also had traditions of outreach and welcoming people from elsewhere, and early integration and early acceptance of people regardless of sexual identity and all. Did these things, you were already there before you got there, though.
I was pretty much there before I got there.
Chapel Hill didn't change you.
I remember I briefly dated a young black woman while I was fresh in college, and I introduced her to my parents, and my mother asked me, because this young lady was extraordinarily accomplished and beautiful and tall, and my mother asked me, what does she see in you?
Yes.
And frankly, I couldn't answer that question very well. And so that's the kind of loving, inclusive family that I grew up in, and church community that I grew up in too. So it seemed like a natural.
And what's the name of the Episcopal church?
It was Church of the Ascension, Knoxville, Tennessee.
That's a wonderful
Now
name.
that's the place where Kathy and I were married 48 and a half years ago also. And that deacon in training was the man who married us. He would become a priest, and he was the man who married us. And came out later in life. I didn't know that, didn't care for a long time. But yeah, Jim Curtis was had gone on to be the rector at Church of the Good Samaritan in Knoxville, which I used to help him. They met in a school building, and I used to ride with him and set up the chairs, and they used carpet squares for kneelers, and I'd put down the carpet squares, and I'd serve as an acolyte and all those things. So I spent a lot of time with Jim helping to establish Church of the Good Samaritan.
Was Rosenberg, our bishop who came here?
I knew Bishop Charlie, but I was ordained and went through my discernment with Bishop George Young, who followed Charlie, Bishop Charlie, and now it's Bishop Brian Cole. Bishop George retired while he still had good sense and his health, and had grandchildren on the way, so he retired. And Bishop Brian is really why I'm here at Holy Cross Faith Memorial.
He knew about, you had health problems.
Yes, I had retired. I told him, I don't want to do this, but I have to retire. And he understood that. And when Kathy and I moved down here with Carla, unbeknownst to me, Bishop Brian called Father Will and said, I have a deacon that's retired down there. Take care of him.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that Will understood what that meant. I'm not sure, and I didn't know about it until Will came to me one day when I was at church and said, you're that deacon from East Tennessee, right? Yes. He said, we need to have lunch. Said, Bishop Brian, who had called him on a Saturday night and interrupted a dinner party that Will and Amanda were having, interrupted a dinner party and would not take no for an answer, would not call back, would not wait, would not let Will call him later, but had the discussion about me while Will was trying to have a dinner party. So here I am.
Those who live a little beyond the borders and get neglected, we have something in our midst which is very much a part of St. Elizabeth's.
Yes.
And yet it's also not exactly a part of us like it could be. What can we do to improve that?
Boy, that's a good question. We don't have as many folks living back there coming to church as I would like to see. And I think it maybe comes down to that, well, you know, I'm living in subsidized housing. Maybe I'm not good enough to be an Episcopalian. Now we've got some stellar examples of folks who defy that image, that are at church every time the doors are open.
Sure.
But I think some of them, somewhere along the way, have maybe lost their faith, or are lonely and don't know how to break out of that loneliness, or are in some way hurting that we don't know about. And maybe we need to find a more organized way to reach out to them, to visit them individually, to be amongst them.
Should it be what we call a ministry here?
Well, we call everything we do here, we call a ministry. And it is a ministry. At least I think that somebody shouldn't do it because it's an assignment. It should be a calling in one way or another. But we don't always pick our callings. Sometimes God lays them on us. And sometimes we don't know that there's a calling to be had. I mean, we don't know if the folks back in St. Elizabeth don't go to other churches, or maybe watch some church online or on television. There's certainly plenty to choose from in both media, online and television and radio and whatever.
I was thinking of something else though, and I don't want you to talk about anything too early, but we have a need for what St. E's does, but it's small.
Yep.
Could we in some way help expand it?
I think we can, and I think we should. Now, whatever we do is going to have to be done in conjunction with others of like mind. And that includes the politicians. It includes other faith traditions. It includes developers. It includes a whole group of folks. And
activists in the community. All kinds of folks. Non-profits, for-profits, you name it. That we can bring in to help us, and maybe we're not the lead group to do that, and that's okay. We don't have to be first in line every time, as long as we're in the game. If we did that, do you have some skills that you could apply?
Well, I like to think so.
Give us some examples. There are people listening that don't know these skills.
Well, when I left North Carolina to go back to Tennessee, I went to organize an effort called the Knoxville Public Safety Collaborative. It was, in essence, a re-entry program for high-risk parolees coming out of prison. And the idea was not to trail, nail, and jail those parolees. In other words, just wait till they screwed up and put them back in prison. The idea was to say, you can be successful in the world, in the free world. And that's what, if you ask any inmate in any institution, they talk about the outside as the free world. Now, we all know it ain't free and it ain't easy, but that's to them,
compared to what they're in.
Compared to what they're in, it is what they are longing for, even if they can't put it into words. It's what they're longing for. But what they're longing for is something that many of them have never had. They've always been on the run, at odds with the society, at odds with the community, at odds with their family. And so we're trying to offer them something brand new, a new life. Doesn't that sound kind of like it might have come out of the Bible?
It sounds like Jesus. But
it sounds like Jesus, doesn't it? Yes. I'm offering you a new life, a new way. And so I think I have some organizational skills that might help.
You know some of the federal regulations.
I know some of them. I don't know a lot about housing, and I'll admit that. But what I do know is that the people who need housing, I think we have 3 housing needs in this community right now, and in most communities, by the way. this community is no different than any other. We need immediate emergency housing. We need short-term or medium-term housing that helps folks learn how to use the skills that they have to live in a community like ours.
As
and
if
then
you'd
we
maybe just come from prison or somewhere, and you know.
exactly re-entry, whatever you want to call it. And then we also need that long-term affordable housing for folks that are still working, and especially for folks who are living maybe only on Social Security and maybe not that much Social Security, or maybe they've got disability and need subsidized housing of some sort. And then, wherever possible, we ought to be helping Habitat for Humanity and organizations like that that are helping people not only find the skills, but use those skills to help other folks build houses and then to help build their own house. So all of those kinds of things requires advocacy. It requires keeping the issue in the forefront of the public, because if you don't keep it in the forefront of the public, it's going to be forgotten, and therefore you're going to lose momentum. So you have to have that, and then advocacy for the various groups. A lot of the groups that we want to help find housing for are not very popular. Folks coming out of jail or out of prison or out of institutions of one sort or another, folks that are old and don't have much to offer, or at least they don't think they have much to offer to the community.
Latin people who may be of color.
People of color, Latinos of all stripes, because we talk about Latinos like they're all from Mexico. The fact is they're not. They're from Peru and Colombia and the Dominican Republic and Haiti and a whole bunch of other places. And many of them share the same history of enslavement that African Americans did. And so we need to find a way to reach out and tell the truth of what really happened and why they are where they are today. And to remind folks, they may not look like you, they may not speak the same language, but in Christ's eyes, they are just like you.
So you have skills in each of these levels.
Well, I hope it.
No, you do.
My real skill, I think, is one-on-one. If I have a skill, that would be it. But I also see the big picture, and I understand the big picture, and I understand how it needs to work. Now, I was pretty good in Knoxville, and I was pretty good in North Carolina, and I was pretty good at the Department of Correction in Nashville, because I knew people, I understood the culture. This place is a whole different place, and you can very easily make the wrong person mad.
Yes.
And not realize that you've done it, number one, and number two, set back a cause that you're passionate about back quite a bit, or get yourself cut out of the discussion about that. So I'm still trying to learn the culture and the history of this place, much less this community, much less how the politics work or don't work. And I'm doing that. I've met with the sheriff, and I've met the fire folks, the firefighters from Midway, and the folks down in Georgetown. But I've got a long way to go. I've met the folks at Helping Hands and the folks at Friendship House in Georgetown. And so I'm getting a little bit better, but I've got a long way to go. And because of my age, I've got a relatively short period of time to do all of this stuff.
Yes.
But I don't do it alone.
That's right.
That's why when I say go in peace to love and serve the Lord, I mean go out those doors and serve the Lord.
Well, you've edified me quite a great deal, and I think we'll let it rest there. Would you do one more dismissal for us?
Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Alleluia. Alleluia.
Thank you.
I do like the socks and the
Yeah.
shoes.
I've got some brown ones like this too.
Well,
I haven't worn them yet.
those are special, though. They're remarkably more USC type colors than.
You can't wear orange every day, everywhere. Well, I guess you could.
You
but
probably could.
if you live in Knoxville,
Knoxville, you might have to.
definitely could.